Good morning, class. This is Teaching. Today we're going to be talking about intonation. We're going to go over what it is, why it's important, and how we should be teaching it in the classroom. Generally speaking, intonation is the rising or falling of your voice. We have three intonations: rising, falling, and flat. Let's look at an example. Hey, hey, hey. Quick note here. Intonation and stress go hand in hand, but they are separate components of pronunciation. In this video, you're going to hear variations of both, but we're only going to focus on intonation. Back to the video. So intonation is pretty straightforward, but that brings us to the question, why is it important? The other day, I was doom scrolling through Instagram, and I came across this video that was a perfect loop. And I thought it was a little strange because the intonation seemed off. And I want to take a look at an example of a mismatched perfect loop video to illustrate how intonation makes us sound natural. Let's take a look at the video.
Perfect loops. They're a staple in short-form video. And that's how I create perfect loops. They're a staple in short-form video.
It sounds strange because in English we use intonation to explain a secondary meaning on top of the words that we're actually saying. Let's take a look at a very simple example. A says, "What do you want for dinner?" B says, "Pizza?" B is using a high intonation to indicate that their reply is a suggestion. It's not a strong answer. But let's listen to that exchange again and let's use a different intonation, this time flat. A says, "What do you want for dinner?" B says, "Pizza." This is a strong answer. There's no question about it and there's no doubt in their mind. Pizza is what they want for dinner. Different intonation gives us different results of how we communicate our ideas. Intonation has many other uses, so let's take a look back at the video and see how they're using intonation to communicate their ideas.
Perfect loops. They're a staple in short-form video.
Now, notice here that he's using a period when he should be using a comma, because he's bringing his speaking to a pause, not a stop. And when you take a pause from speaking, your intonation generally goes down. Let's listen to the sentence again. Now, notice here that he's using a period when he should be using a comma, because he's bringing his speaking to a pause, not a stop. And when you take a pause from speaking, your intonation generally goes down. Conversely, when you're bringing your sentence to a stop, your intonation goes up. Let's listen to the last sentence again. Now, notice here that he's using a period when he should be using a comma, because he's bringing his speaking to a pause, not a stop. And when you take a pause from speaking, your intonation generally goes down. Finally, let's listen to the video one more time and examine why we think this sounds strange.
And that's how I create perfect loops. They're a staple in short-form video.
We expect the intonation to go up because he's ending a sentence, but actually it goes down because he's starting a sentence for the beginning of the video. So ultimately, our expectation and his delivery are mismatched. This is why it sounds strange. So I want to make a disclaimer here and explain that these rules are descriptive, not prescriptive, meaning that these rules are observations. They don't account for exceptions and they are not objective. No rules in any language are objective. But this also means that we get a lot of freedom in how we choose to use intonation to express our ideas. Here are some examples that I thought were fun. This is a pen. This is a pen. This is a pen. This is a pen? This is a pen. This is a pen! This is a pen. This is a pen? This is a pen. This is a pen. This is a
すごい。
pen.
やっぱり外国人はやばいね。
Well, this is a pen. This is a pen. As you can see, intonation is a very versatile communication tool, and when paired with rhythm and stress, we get a whole plethora of options on how we can choose to express nuance. Hopefully now you can see the importance of intonation when communicating. And this brings us to the big question. How do we teach intonation in a classroom? This is kind of like asking someone, how do you take a good picture? Well, yeah, there's a lot of good ways to take a good picture. Buy a tripod, have warm lighting, rule of 3. But there's no objective one answer that gives you good results. So I'm going to give you some advice or some things to think about when you're practicing with your students. Number one, exaggeration. If you have to teach intonation, it's likely that your students don't have an intuition for intonation, which also means that they likely won't be able to hear or distinguish the subtle differences in your intonation that you think are very obvious. So we need to exaggerate the difference so that they can hear it clearly and try and imitate it. The trick is they likely won't match you all the way here when you're exaggerating your tone. They're likely going to shy away and they're going to meet you somewhere in the middle. And this is great because this area is exactly where you want them to be when they're communicating in a normal conversation. Let's take a look at a quick example. The exaggeration looks like this. How are you? I sound like a cartoon character. And they're going to match you like this. How are you? How are you? That is a completely normal pronunciation and something that you would use in a day-to-day conversation. Number two, role play. One of the most missed opportunities I see when students are practicing English is a flat read. That means they're reading off the paper with no tone or intonation at all, completely monotone. And this is bad for a lot of reasons. What students should be doing is acting out their situations. This means gestures, intonation, props if need be. The goal here is to build muscle memory of what a normal conversation will sound like. Now, I understand, reading is a difficult task. When I'm trying to read Japanese, I'm not thinking about intonation, I'm thinking about, am I reading the characters correctly? And that's likely the challenge for a lot of younger students. So, as teachers, it's our responsibility to lower the bar here. Now, we can do this in a lot of ways. We can give students extra time to read before they practice with their partner. We can do overlapping. That means the teacher reads and the student reads at the same time. It's kind of difficult, but it happens. Or you could just do the tried true method, listening and repeating. But whatever the case is, whatever you think is most appropriate, do that. Make it easier, make it more approachable, but don't put the bar on the ground. Number three, I think, is the most controversial, but the most helpful, in my opinion. And that is showing clear utility. That means explaining the rules of intonation and what different intonation means in different contexts. Take, for example, a yes or no question. If a question can be answered with a binary yes or no, more often than not, the intonation will go up. Take, for example, do you like ice cream? But if a question has multiple answers, more often than not, the intonation will go down. What flavor do you like? Now, thinking like this puts a very technical lens on a very fluid mechanic of English communication. And this runs the risk of overcomplicating simple exchanges with things that might be very interesting, but ultimately are unnecessary. In the best case scenario, a star grade A student might develop a better ability to express their emotions. But in the worst case scenario, I think most students will feel overwhelmed and intimidated by these English grammar rules and will lose motivation to study. Some final notes before we wrap up class. Intonation is very simple. Kids are very young. They learn very easily the rules of intonation. So it's important that as teachers, we have the students using proper intonation with fun activities and games. Easier said than done. Intonation is also not very important when it comes to tests, which in Japan, tests are 90% of the reason anyone in Japan is studying English. Finally, all languages have intonation. We just use intonation a little differently. So our responsibility as language teachers and language learners is to bridge the gap between different cultures. And I realize how pretentious that sounds, and that's okay. That's okay? That's okay. So this is a pen. It's so stupid. What am I doing?